Is an ACC FSU settlement imminent? Let's talk about it.
Conference realignment and lawsuits are always in the news, so we're back on the big mountain to break it down for you.
Hey, it's great to have you back on the mountain. I am JY, and this is my good friend Steve, and it's time again to talk about FSU and the ACC. It has been quite a bit since we have done one of these episodes. I know we have a lot of Seminole subscribers, so we're happy to get back at this. And I just want to remind everybody real quick, before we get into this, we're going to talk a little bit about the Ross Dellenger reporting that came out last week, remind some people of what you know through your sources at Penn State, and get into maybe just some of our opinions on all of this. But, you know, FSU and Clemson right now, they want out of the ACC. Well, why do they want out? They want more money. And how can they get more money? They can get more money by going to a P2 conference. At least that's been our thoughts from the very beginning. They want to get to the Big Ten or the SEC. Why do we have these lawsuits? Well, there's two main reasons. Number one, the exit fees, money. How much is it going to cost them to leave the ACC? And number two, and an item I know you're going to talk about, Steve, the timeline. When can they actually leave the ACC? Because of the grant of rights, because of the Constitution, all that stuff. We've done so many episodes on that, makes my head spin. So, let's talk about this Ross Dellenger reporting that came out last Tuesday. And there's, potentially a possible settlement being discussed right now between these two parties. It's been going on for several weeks, according to the reporting that Ross has been doing. What this looks like, again, according to Ross, is there may be some sort of new revenue structure. What does that mean? He says it would potentially have a separate pot of money that would be distributed based on media value. This could be tied to both football and or basketball. It would be available to all the ACC members. Also, they would look to amend the current length of the grant of rights from 2036 to maybe around 2030. That's what we're hearing. I know Steve's going to get into that a little bit more. So the reporting here is hitting on the two things that we've been talking about: money, the exit fees, more value for your media rights, just money, money, money in general, and the timeline of all this, 2036 or something much before that. So Steve, why don't you talk a little bit about what you've said in the past and where you think maybe this is headed here in maybe the near future if we're going to have some sort of a settlement?
Okay, well, there's two things that I've been clear about all along. First is the Big Ten is definitely interested in Florida State. They've been interested in Florida State. They're still interested in Florida State. They're going to continue to be interested in Florida State. But the other part of that is the Big Ten's timeline didn't necessarily match up with Florida State's timeline. And here's the reason. Because basically the Florida State superfans and some of the boosters and everybody, they're ready to get out of the ACC now.
Right.
Yesterday, last August. Literally, they want to be gone. They wanted to be playing, whether it was a Big Ten schedule, independent schedule in 2025, 26, 27, somewhere in there, which I think maybe could have been accommodated if there was a settlement or a lawsuit win or whatever. And I said, maybe we would see something 27, 28, whatever. But basically, it needed to be closer to the Big Ten's preferred timeline, which is 29 or 30, which matches up with when their new media deal is going to be negotiated. Their media deal expires in 2030. That's when you're going to get new money into the deal. They were able to work something out with Fox before to get Oregon and Washington, but Oregon and Washington basically had to take a 50% cut, 50%
Right.
deal. There wasn't any new money at that point, and they would prefer not to have to do that. So the Big Ten's preferred timeline is as close to 29, 30, 31 as you could possibly get. So that was always a big holdup. Now, we had some national reporters saying things like, there's no guarantee that the Big Ten wants Florida State right now. And you would have some people that would run on that. Oh, there's not a spot for Florida State.
Right.
I think a lot of the Big 12, and I think you're going to touch on the Big 12.
Yeah.
So some of the Big 12 fans were like, oh, well, if they can't get a spot in the SEC or the Big 10. But what you have to look at with that reporting was they didn't have a spot right now. Because again, the Big Ten's timeline was not as fast and was not as urgent. They didn't want to get involved in this mess, and it wouldn't be smart to get involved in this mess until A, Florida State had a legal exit where everything was figured out.
Yep.
That was part of it. And B, they would much rather prefer when they were going to have some new money into the deal, because none of the other schools, even if it helps them to bring Florida State in eventually, they don't want to take less money at any one point. So when you have a pie of a certain size and you add more people, nobody wants to take a smaller slice of that pie. So with this settlement, I have no information on Dellenger's reporting, if it's actually going to happen or whatever. No new information from my sources at Penn State that give me Big Ten information. But all I can say is it really matches up with what I've continued to hear about the Big Ten's preferred timeline.
Well, and you said from the very beginning when we started doing this about a year ago, like 27, 28 was the earliest that this could happen. The earliest.
Yes.
Not even that it was going to happen then, but the earliest it could happen. And even 28 is when potentially, if they get this grant of rights changed to 2030, let's just assume it's 2030, what you're seeing here in realignment, you're getting schools, and let's look at what recently happened in the PAC originally with USC and UCLA, and then here more recently with some of my schools in the Mountain West. They've announced a year and a half, more than a year and a half, in advance of going to another conference. So this could still mean if 2030 is the end of the grant of rights, you could still see an announcement coming from FSU and Clemson in 2028. Right. It just doesn't mean they're actually playing the schedule until maybe 2030. So that's kind of how a realignment is started to happen. You saw that again, Texas and Oklahoma. I left them out. That's what you're seeing, and maybe there's enough there for a year that they're willing to pay kind of that upcharge to get out a year early. So maybe that's 29. And again, I'm assuming all of this around 2030. But that all makes sense. And again, that's the timeline you have been saying for quite a while. So
and it's important to remember, money makes the world go round. Money makes all of these things happen.
Yeah.
And if there's no money until 29 or 30, then it makes sense as to why almost all these moves are being done because of money. When are we going to get that money injected into the Big Ten?
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. I want to talk about a settlement here real quick, and then I want to talk a little bit about that Big 12 smoke that is completely dissipated and evaporated and is no longer anywhere in the social space anymore, and we never bought into to begin with. But I'll get to that at the very end. I want to talk about a settlement. So, I see some questions right now. Wow, could this be a move by Florida State and Clemson to kind of be like, wow, we need to stay in the conference because things aren't going our way, our cases are weak, and I know FSU people, you're going to tell me that Judge Cooper, everything's going great down in Tallahassee, but we don't truly know behind the scenes what's going on in the appeals, what their attorneys are actually telling them. We truly don't know that. So again, could this be a case where FSU and Clemson are showing weakness because they want to have a settlement here to stay in the conference for the next 4 years or 5 or 6, whatever that is? Or is this a move by the ACC because, they have to now give in to the demands of these schools because they have a weaker side, and Lord knows they can't have the grant of rights, kind of getting blown up, because that would be completely catastrophic. So you can spin it both ways. Oh, it's because of the schools being worried. Oh, it's because of the ACCs being worried. But guess what, Steve? It's probably both. And not both that they're worried their case isn't strong enough, but, we've gone now here, we're getting close to a year. We haven't gotten anywhere. We haven't even gotten to first base because we can't figure out where these daggone cases are going to be heard, or at least heard first, and they're spending gobs of money on this. And, at some point, you got to kind of count your losses and figure out what you can get. So let's talk about that here a little bit, side, because no matter what happens, when there's a settlement, and we've been clear that we think a settlement is going to happen, both sides, PR machines, will be spinning that settlement into their own version, and that they were the beneficiary of this settlement. That's what's going to happen, okay? And the reality of it's going to be somewhere in between, right? So, but let's talk about here a settlement and kind of the give and take that is required within a settlement here. So in this case, the ACC potentially wins with some sort of a settlement because the grant of rights is still intact. it's still valid. It's still, Steve, dare I say, ironclad because it wasn't broken. Okay, maybe. The schools, of course, win because they were able to go back to what I started this whole segment with, this whole episode with, timeline and money. Again, I'm going to use 2030. We don't know that to be exact, but I'm going to use it. Let's say they now have cut this timeline of 2036 in half to 2030. That's a huge win. It may not be quick enough for the super fans and the boosters and all of that, but that is a massive win for these schools if that's what comes out of a settlement. Also, they're able to answer some of these exit fee questions in terms of what's in the Constitution, what can be negotiated. You know, we talked about maybe that onesie, twosie year, not an 8Z, 9Z year that you have to pay for your media rights, you know, to kind of buy them back. And that's what we've seen here in realignment, maybe a 1 year type of deal. And that's not to say that they completely agree right now or in the future in 2030 with this higher exit penalty. But that's something they can negotiate at the time. We all know how that works. There could be a negotiation. Maybe they pay the whole thing. Maybe they don't. That's an issue you can figure out in 2030 or 2029 when you actually do it. But we know what that more severe penalty is in the Constitution. I've always said that's pretty black and white. And quite frankly, if you told FSU the only thing that you're going to have to pay in 2030 is that fee, which is going to be whatever it is, 150 million versus 700 million that they used as, again, let's go from 600 million to 150 million. Massive win for that school. And it's not a loss to the ACC because that's what's in their daggone bylaws or their Constitution. That's what they build in. So that's a win-win. Hey, we build it in, you're paying it, that's what you have to pay, done deal. So nobody wins in that scenario, you're just doing what you have to do. And again, that can still be negotiated as well. So Steve, as you said, timeline, if they're able to crush down that timeline by half, I mean, I'm an outsider here, but I'm going, that's a win for the schools. If they're able to only have to pay this severe exit penalty that they all agree to in their Constitution, that's a win for both sides because they're following what they all agreed to. So, you know, again, can it be spun that somebody's a winner and somebody's a loser? Absolutely, and that's what's going to happen. But a settlement, as we've said, is most likely, and it's the quickest that FSU and Clemson will be able to get out of this if a settlement is even on the table right now. Again, we're using Ross Dellenger's reporting. So any comments on that, Steve?
I agree with everything you said. I want to add some further thoughts because
I figured you would.
Yes. As we've talked about when we were covering the PAC and now the ACC, whenever there's a settlement, one, you have to have both sides, at least one side, preferably both, determining, hey, there's a risk. We're at risk. Yeah. We could have to pay a lot of money. We could, you know, whatever the risks are. So there has to be risk, but then there also has to be something, some kind of a carrot. There's a carrot and a stick. Okay, you have the stick, which is the risk, and then you have the carrot. Something that each side can say, well, this is good. I'm getting this. I can move forward with this. So I have 6 different groups that would, if this reporting is correct, and this is what happens, something to this nature happens. Yeah. I have 6 different groups that are winning. FSU wins because they're getting out of the ACC sooner than what's on paper right now, which is what they wanted to do. The
doom and gloom.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And paying less money, possibly no money, depending on how it works out. Yep. The ACC wins because they're keeping their conference intact as it is now for another 5 or 6 years. They're keeping intact their grant of rights, all of their agreements. And it gives them time. Okay, we know in 2030 FSU and Clemson are going to be gone. It gives them much more of a runway to that time period where they can add a USF, they can add a Memphis, and that clarity gives them stronger negotiating power with ESPN or whoever, what other partners they're going to be with. It gives them a lot of clarity and security because, you know, they are in danger. We don't think this is going to happen, but there is a danger where if they were to lose this case, the entire conference could get blown up.
Right. This
ensures their stability and their security if this indeed happens.
Yep.
The Big Ten wins, I think, because they get at least one of the schools. I know they're interested in Florida State. I'm not sure on Clemson. We'll see.
Yep.
But the Big Ten will be able to get some targets that they want for their expansion and get it probably aligned with their preferred timeline, which is huge. I think all conferences win because it keeps that grant of rights intact. It keeps the stability and the bylaws of conferences. Doesn't blow the whole thing up, because if this were to all get torn down for the ACC, that calls into question. And we talked about the sovereign immunity.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? There's another public university in the state of Florida, University of Florida, who's a member of the SEC, and I'm sure the SEC does not want their grant of rights and all of their things torn down, blown up due to sovereign immunity in that state. So all the conferences win. The SEC wins. Basically, the conferences want to keep the status quo. They want to keep stability. So all the conferences win. The media partners win, because then they could say, again, the grant of rights stayed intact, everything stayed intact. We didn't blow up the system. We have media partners, when they're investing money in these leagues, they want some stability and some security and some assurances that they're getting what they're paying for.
The reason for a grant of rights,
exactly.
quite frankly.
Yes. So the media partners will win. I think they'll be happy with that clarity and that security. And I'll say the courts will win. We've had a lot of different experts. We had David. What's his last name? Mackenzie on. He's on the Big Mountain, Mount Rushmore.
That's right.
We had Doug Rohan on. He's also on the Big Mountain, Mount Rushmore. We've had them on, and we followed a lot of different legal experts that have differing opinions. And the grant of rights, the sovereign immunity in the state of Florida, those are huge cases that could. We may run into a situation where we had a conflicting judgment in North Carolina versus what happened in Florida. Then what happens if there is, if sovereign immunity were to blow this up in Florida? It calls into the question, basically, what are the role of the courts? Are they just partisan? Are they just looking out for their own states? Can you get a fair judgment in the state of Florida versus another state, whatever? It would just be, judges love settlements, because they don't want to come down with a controversial opinion, a decision. And so if they can come to a settlement where both sides are going to, give and take, it takes a lot of the stress off of them. So I think in both cases, in North Carolina, all three, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida, the judges and the courts would be very happy to not have to decide this case and not have to possibly have, differing judgments, or not race to judgment. So everybody is a winner in this situation, in my opinion.
So is that a sepfecta?
Yeah, I
or
think so.
Or a cisfecta, 6 or 7? I don't know, whatever that is. I was trying to be cute there. Yeah. But yeah, and I agree. It's funny because usually you hear people say, when nobody's happy with a settlement, it's a good settlement. But you just created a win-win-win-win-win. What was it, 6 or 7 wins?
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's, and I get it.
I think it's a sexfecta.
Sexfecta.
Yeah.
There we go. I like that.
Yeah.
It's not, and again, everybody would be like, well, we gave up something. But let's be honest, like, you also, what we were able to keep and maintain was far more important than what you potentially gave up. I would think. Again, I'm an outsider. I don't have skin in this game, but certainly seems like a sexfecta win.
Right.
The last thing I want to talk about, just some of that Big 12 stuff. And we did not talk about this back when it was hot and heavy. We talked about it from the standpoint of, we don't believe it. We think it's smoke. We don't think there's anything rare. I don't even think we did standalone episodes, maybe brought it up on a few live shows or something like that. I just hope people realize that you were being sold snake oil. You were a big smoke screen was coming up through socials and through different YouTube channels. And we didn't buy into that. I don't think a lot of Seminole or Tiger fans really bought into that because they knew what they wanted. But kind of, if you were on the outside, a lot of people bought into it. Oh, wow, looky here. Maybe they're going to go to the Big 12. You and I have been following this from the very beginning. Part of the reason that we knew it was a smokescreen was, one, because we've been following these cases from the very beginnings of them, and two, your information from Penn State and you knowing that the Big Ten will have a spot for FSU. So when you combine those two things here from what we've done in researching this, reading all of the daggone hearings, I don't know how many hours I spent reading these things, we could see that there just wasn't really any facts to that. It was, and this was a time the Big 12 was putting out. This wasn't the only kind of smokescreen they had. They had several going out. I mean, I talked about a PR machine earlier, about 3-4 months ago. That Big 12 smoke machine, PR machine, was going cray-cray out there. So just be careful. You know, you can listen to whoever you want. You can follow whoever you want. We really don't care. We appreciate you listening to this episode. Hopefully you're subscribed to our channel. Just be careful with taking everything very literally. And, you know, a source isn't always a source. That's all I will say.
Well, and I'll say your last point there really illustrated a third reason why, third indicator of why this was not going to happen was we have a lawsuit going on that could potentially reach $1 billion. Okay?
Right. Yeah.
And you have the Big 12 media PR people out there. Oh, sure, we take Florida State. We're open for business. We're evaluating everybody. And you have the Big 10 totally silent.
Yes.
So we talked about this with Doug Rohan.
Yes.
If you're the Big 10, you don't want your name associated. You do not want to get wrapped up in this lawsuit whatsoever.
Right.
For the Big 12, I think they knew they were not a contender for Florida State. They probably reached out to Florida State at some point, and Florida State let them know, no, we're not interested.
Yeah.
We're doing this. We're spending all this money because we want to go either to the SEC or to the Big 10 where we're going to make a lot of money. We don't want to do a lateral move.
Right.
So the Big 12, I think they want to keep their name in the headlines. They want to keep that excitement.
Yep.
And so they were willing to step in that dog poo.
Yep.
And the Big 10 is just totally quiet until basically the moment whenever it's going to happen.
Well, they stepped into the kind of the vacant space of no news, right? Because we had a lot of the hearings going, and then everything kind of slowed down because we were waiting on appeals, and nobody really knew what was happening. And they're like, it's kind of quiet. Let's cause some noise.
Attention.
Yeah, so that's a great point, and Doug did bring that to our attention. The last time he was on, Doug really brought up that aspect of there's no way this is happening with the Big 12 or they would have massive issues in terms of just, he uses the correct word, I'm drawing a blank.
They basically would have just been adding themselves to a $600 to $800 million lawsuit.
Yes, for sure. So there's the trifecta of reasons we knew it was really going nowhere. So, hey, that is it. We had to do another FSU update, Clemson update, ACC update, because there was some big news coming last week, and we have to get this out the beginning of this week. As you guys know, we do live pick shows every Wednesday evening. Steve is picking all the FSU games. As he said, he expects FSU to be in the Big Ten someday, maybe 3, 4, 5 years from now, but someday to be in the Big Ten.
I picked Florida State to cover against Cal this week.
You did.
And they did it.
You did. I was a little surprised, but you did pick them. So, hey, we do live pick shows on Wednesdays, 8:30 Eastern, 5:30 Pacific. We also cover all things Big Ten, Mountain West, and we stay on this ACC, FSU, Clemson lawsuit stuff. I know it's died down here a little bit. We're waiting on potential hearings and things like that and real news, but this was so juicy and beefy, we had to do a follow-up with this. Hopefully you enjoy our content. Make sure you like this one and subscribe if you like our channel. We'll see you next time on The Big Mountain.